this class a little short because I have a meeting about accreditation visit at 5 o'clock, so we got to get cooking here. I'm sorry?
Oh, I thought you said we're getting ABA accredited.
No, it's New England Association of Schools and Colleges.
That's the one that we're already accredited.
That's correct. That's next week. So let me just say that I'm going to have to cut this a little short because I've got a meeting with faculty and the like. No, at 5. Next Tuesday at this time, or at 4 o'clock actually, the New England Association of Schools and Colleges will be here, and they have scheduled at 4 o'clock next Tuesday a meeting with the students. Any interested students who would like to come share their thoughts about how great your experience is here. Anything else you'd like to share? So we're not going to be able to start till 5 o'clock next Tuesday. And you all should feel free to go. There'll be food and drinks and stuff. But you should, if you would, go and talk to them. That would be great as well, because they really do want to hear from students, faculty, staff. They want to hear from everyone. That will be next Tuesday, and that'll be in the room right across the hall here, 208. But we've got to finish section 10, these family law cases, and they're unusual family law cases. So when I left you last time, I asked you to think about how we're going to value the cost of that child, but how we also value the benefit, because you are being conferred a benefit if you have this child. So how do you do that? And by the way, how do you really get the cost of the child to raise them to God knows when you could also give them up for adoption? Again, with the notion of mitigation of damages. Tell me that we can't force anyone to abort a child. We can't force you not to give birth to the child. But if you give birth to the child, if it's such a burden, we've seen from our earlier cases in this area that there are families willing to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to have a child. Give them up. No. And if you're not giving them up, at least in part, we have to recognize that there's some benefit. So how do you determine what the benefit is? Because even if we give you all the costs of raising that child, on the other side of the ledger is you've been conferred, to some extent, some type of benefit that has a financial value to it. One has to be offset against the other. I mean, the decision says that, doesn't it? So tell me how you do that. And I want to put one other question out on the table, because the decision says, at least I think it says, and I'll ask you if you agree, the decision seems to make a distinction between those people who choose not to have more children because of the financial expense involved, and those people who choose not to have children because they're concerned about the child being unhealthy or carrying genetic problems and the like. And is there a difference there? Suppose someone decides we're not going to have any more children because our first child has some birth defects that we're worried about that the next child might have as well. But then the child's born and is completely healthy and free of those birth defects. So now you don't have any damage whatsoever, even under the same circumstances? So there's a bunch of different questions on the floor. You can take and run with whatever one you like.
I think if their only concern was that the child would have defects and that's why they didn't have the child, and if they had it and it was healthy, then I don't think that they should recover for anything. I mean, if that was their only issue.
There's no damage.
Correct. If, on the other hand, it was a financial difficulty, I could see how that could be an ongoing problem. And damages could be easily calculated for that. So.
Well, when you say easily calculated for that, what do you mean? Like, well, how much?
For example, you would take into account, like on average, how much it would take to raise a child, and then you have the college and the school.
So all of that, though, clothing and food and sneakers and...
Well, to support a child.
But is that the damage when we're talking about it? Is the complete cost to raise that child from 0 to through college?
There's also other factors that could play into. I mean, what if the mother wanted to be a stay-at-home mom? Then you could supplement her income from not working and staying.
So now I have to pay her too?
Possibly.
No, is that right?
No,
so,
I think it's just for the cost of the child.
The cost of the child itself.
Just the cost of raising the child? Does that? And so what? Then let me ask that. What about daycare then?
Yeah,
Because daycare expense is
Yeah.
outrageous now. So wait a minute, so daycare's in? Because if daycare's in, then why couldn't the lawyer say, well, we're not going to pay for daycare, but my partner is losing income as a result of choosing to stay at home, therefore we would like an offset for that.
I think you get both.
You get both.
You get one or the other.
One or the other, but each are recoverable.
But
I think
income
it
is
should.
far.
How till what age?
18, that's it.
Well,
Until the child's 18,
No,
daycare?
not for you.
Until you can leave them home.
So what age can you leave them home alone?
What average?
Because I don't think we're going to have an agreement on that either.
Then how come you have to pay child support until you're 18 years old anyway?
I think
Because they still have expenses, but not daycare.
Yeah, daycare.
Most daycares are until 12.
15,
No,
stay at home?
I think it's like 12.
Most
I
daycares
think
are
it's
12.
like 12.
I mean, it was 16.
It's 12.
I was
Yeah,
in
Because my
Walmart
daughter
at
just
7 or
turned
8.
12.
And she's on her own. So-
Oh my God.
So that's a long time though.
Yeah, it is.
So we're looking at, and by the way, what would it be, private school or public school even for the early years? Private?
No, you would assume public.
Well, because you're sticking your hand into the doctor's pocket, this is where there's no limit to this?
No, you would assume public because private is an option that you don't have to take.
Well, we would do the same thing for college though too, wouldn't we? But I'm sure you're gonna tell me that could be
Well, it
either.
might depend on if you already have another child who's in private school. You might be able to show that you were planning on sending.
So
all
we'll
your
look at
kids.
what it is you've done and what you've done.
Your
We can-
standard of living.
You can make a consistent damage model for this would be what this child would receive. It sounds like a lot of money before we're done, right? Okay, and I think all of these we can look at numbers and look at what we think is likely. Do we all agree that I as a doctor get some credit on the other side of this equation when you're done adding up all your expenses? That it has to be offset against the value of what you've received.
I don't think so.
What do you say, Mike?
I don't think so.
You don't think there's any value to having the
No.
loves of your life?
Yes,
here?
but I don't think that's an issue that you can put a dollar amount on in any circumstances.
Well, how is that?
Especially when my choice was not to have that child at all. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to love that child and enjoy that child, but that wasn't what my contract with the doctor was about. And I don't think that should influence what the amount of money is. No, I don't. I really don't.
Well, go ahead.
What if the child is a prodigy and the child is something?
What if the
unique
child?
and
What if the
become a
child?
movie star?
What if the child is a criminal?
Does it matter?
Well, but wait a minute though, you're saying there's no value? There's no value to your son or daughter who ends up in criminal activity?
But I did not choose to have this child.
No, but again, I think I'm going back to the point the other day. At some point you did, right? It's okay, the doctor messed up, but at some point you did because.
But that's another issue. That's my personal belief, not my personal choice to not have an abortion, is not what is relevant.
Okay, but you made that, you crossed that bridge.
Yeah.
And that, now you still chose to give birth.
Right.
Now you have another option. You have another option. There's people dying for children. You don't want to, and I can understand. I would have a hard time with that as well. But you made another choice, and so that choice you must have made thinking that God, I mean, is that what it is? God damn it! For the next 21 years, I got this horrible albatross strapped across my back.
I think it's an analogous argument to, well, you murdered me. We had an automobile accident, and I was driving a crappy car. So because of that, when you hit me in your Mercedes, you really if I was in a better car, you would have caused me less injury. So I should be responsible.
Well, I don't think I understand.
All right?
I get what you're saying.
And I don't understand how the doctor's Mercedes factors into it at all. Because I do think that's affecting our
It's
thinking
like you
is
take
that.
them as you see them, the eggshell thing.
But I don't disagree. You take them as you see them. But are you saying her two daughters bring no value to her?
No.
To my three children?
No,
None?
No, but I don't.
Do you have children?
I do.
Okay, and there isn't one day where they've ever brought you a smile to your face, Karen?
That's not what the issue is.
Yeah, but you
That's
can't
not
put a
what
monetary value on a smile, like she said. It's
Ho, 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 ho! We can put a monetary value on the cost of raising this child through college without any problem whatsoever. But, whoa, wait a minute, if you want me to put a value, and we can put a value on your loss of use and enjoyment of various activities when you're in an accident. We can put a value on your lost employment, your lost future opportunities. We can put a value on the scar that's on your face or some other portion of your body. But heavens forbid, this is sacrilegious now, Professor Boyd, to put a value on human life other than the cost. That doesn't affect, you don't see a bit of a problem with that logic?
Okay, so extending the argument further, that fine, there's a value that can be attached to the joy and everything else that your children bring. What if it's more than the monetary damages that are being awarded, then what happens?
What do you think? What should
I
happen?
think you should have that comparison, that the doctor's damages should be offset against the happiness they get from a child.
Do any of you have pets?
Fair.
Dog or cat?
I did.
Okay, so if I should take a knife and slice your little dog or cat's neck and cut their head right off, you have no loss, because we can't possibly value your pet's
But
life.
Isn't the law in Massachusetts that you only get back the cost of the pet?
Well,
Isn't that
that's
the
all.
case?
That's all it's worth. Well, okay. Let me be more callous. Well, because we know a healthy child, the value, if we were looking to sell the child, could be anywhere between $50,250,000 easy, right? So there is we know we could place a value on that child on the black market. We could. Wait, what? What's the matter? Let me just say, if that child should somehow be injured, God forbid even lost, are you saying you folks wouldn't sue for the value of that child? Because it's impossible to estimate? Geneva?
Well, then if that's the case, you're going to have to put a value on if you do lose the child. Now, you caused me even more pain because your incident made me have this child that now I'm depressed over losing.
But see, I have a little bit of problem with that logic. This is a child you didn't want, didn't care about, feel incredibly burdened that you now have to have it, to the point where you want to stick your hand in my pocket and take hundreds of thousands of dollars. But oh my, he or she is now forever lost to us. I mean, there is an inconsistency there. I can't be the only one that sees that, right?
I think you are.
Well, let me point out page 771 to you, where the court says a substantial number of jurisdictions have allowed recovery of the cost of rearing a normal child to adulthood, offset, however, by the benefits that the parents receive in having a normal, healthy child. You see that language on 771?
Yes.
So there's a credit coming.
I see the language, but I don't necessarily agree with the opinion. I understand.
But I'm not sure I really can understand why, because, listen, let me ask you this. Why do we choose to have children knowing they are outrageously expensive to sustain?
But
Go ahead.
but I didn't choose to have. Yes, after the fact I chose, but that's when other issues, my moral issues, when I chose not to have an abortion, when I chose to keep this child because I didn't want to burden the adoption. I felt that I had created this child. I now had a responsibility. But but that wasn't my initial choice, and that must be honored. So all of this is
I'll honor
superfluous.
that, but
I think all the rest is superfluous.
How can it be superfluous? At some point, those of us that have children, or those of you intending to have children, because there are people that hate children, and so to them this would be a horrible burden, okay? But to a lot of people, it isn't. Why are you having children? Or why did you have children? Why are you having children?
You don't want to ask me.
Well, I mean, I assume this analysis in part says, well, because we think those of us that want children think we have a more fulfilling life with them. And we know they're burdens, right? Real burdens. And they're not just financial. But they must bring value to your life. No? They do.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay. So why is it that we can't put a monetary value on that value? $5 a day? No, it's not.
Does it change in the teen years? Because it does to me.
Our friend doesn't know. Between 12 and 16, it gets really nasty. When you get to control the car keys, you get some level of control back again. But those teenage years aren't pretty bad.
No, no, no.
Honestly, it's worse when they're older.
I know. But so, and right, the value may not be the same throughout, right? But I'm not sure how logically you guys can tell me the doctor gets 0 credit. Because we know all the expenses, but they do bring joy to us at times too, don't they?
I do slightly agree with you.
Just begrudgingly and slightly.
I do, because it's similar to if you didn't get the right order or something like that and you kept it, it's like you get damages for whatever caused you a problem for not getting exactly what you wanted, but you got some use out of it, so it's balanced. So I do think you get some cost benefit analysis. It's just never going to be outweighed by the doctor's wrongdoing.
I'm not sure it will, but I want to know how we're going to value that credit, because I get a credit. The case says I get a credit. I have to get a credit. You would, if in fact the law was different, and I took your dog or your cat from you, you would want to be able to recover for the loss of companionship of that animal, right?
How do you value it though? I agree you get a benefit, but how do you?
That's what I'm trying to get over as well, as how to.
Yeah, I mean, I agree you should get some kind of offset. I agree with that.
$5 a day?
I guess you could
I
look
just
at,
don't know.
A per diem argument?
if they don't put you in a nursing home.
Well, some of it dance the argument that hopefully they'll take care of us when they're older. I don't put much faith in that either. Okay. Go ahead, then I'll come over.
I guess I would try to measure it according to the average that most people would pay to raise a child at that time. You know what I mean? And I mean, it may change in the future, but at this point, that's the only way you can really measure. And maybe average it in those numbers versus trying to put a daily actual dollar amount.
Well, let me spring forward from that a little bit. Don't most people, if they do it all, think about sort of the cost-benefit analysis, at the end of the day, realizing they're extraordinarily costly, still choose to have children? Well, doesn't that then logic tend to indicate that the value is greater than the cost?
Yeah, but the difference here is the choice to be able to decide. So, in your case where you were talking about the dog and getting sliced up, right? So that's something that's being taken away that they should be compensated for. Here, it's different because the parent is given something that they didn't really want in the first place. So I don't understand why that should offset the cost. However, I do not think it's fair that the doctor has to pay everything without nothing being, I guess.
Well, I guess what's fair about the point you bring to bear is that if this really is this incredible burden and chore, then maybe you shouldn't be just suing for the child. Maybe you should let someone raise the child who won't see it as that. No? I mean, if you're unwilling to acknowledge any benefit, geez, I don't know, you sound like you might not be the right person to bring the child. I mean, you laughed when I said Mom and Dad didn't want you so much they sued. But that's where we're still at here, Geneva.
In that case, I agree with Karen in that the main issue is the lack of choice, that the issue is what the doctor did or didn't do. And so even if there is a benefit or whatnot, or when parents choose to have kids, they're weighing costs and benefit, but at the same time, they're probably really not looking at all the negative sides, really, when they think to have children. Because if that was the case, people would have to sit down and be like, all right, my child could be a heroin addict, my child could go to jail, and all these things are negative, but people don't like to think that when they think they're going to have kids. So this time, we're actually looking at legitimate things that could happen.
So, go ahead,
I was just thinking that there is no 100% guarantee in anything you do in life.
Correct.
So of people think birth control all the time and still end up pregnant. What are they going to sue every birth control company in the world? I mean, you know, you have sex, you expect something to happen. You gotta love your child and do it the best way you can. I mean,
I agree with you. I think the problem, and just from the standpoint of the contract and negligence law here, and I imagine, I mean, this is a real exception. The likelihood of that disclosure being the same one given today is just absolutely not possible. That, you know, this is a foolproof procedure that you never have to worry about under any circumstances being pregnant again. I mean, that is just a ridiculous overstatement of the likely successfulness of the procedure. And, you know, anyone who's even gone to a doctor for relatively minor things lately, they virtually tell you, well, anything could happen in the next 24 hours, so best of luck. Just sign right here. And we do. And so the problem is, but this one, relatively bulletproof guarantee that obviously, as Fiona points out, there, in that regard, there are no bulletproof guarantees with respect to the lack of becoming pregnant. I think you got to work. I think you got to work a little bit with how we're going to value the offset. But I want to ask you another quick point on this. Did you read the dissent? Because I thought the dissent was pretty good. But I'm actually going to ask you a different question. O'Connor, Nolan, and Lynch. Now, Justice Lynch is a trustee of the law school. Really nice guy, by the way. Justice Nolan has 8 kids of his own. And I don't know much about Justice O'Connor other than his name. But it looks like 3 likely Irish Catholics in that group. Does that make a difference? Does your religion or your religious views affect either the lawyer or the judge you are? Because I look at this case and I think it's kind of a pretty stark. I mean, is it really? It looks to me like at least it had to affect their thinking on that issue, at least in part. So is that a card you play? Or is that, I'm just wondering maybe how it affects you.
As far as asking for the judge to disqualify himself because
Well, I wouldn't be hard-pressed selling that notion. But I had a divorce client early on ask me, she said, I know you're Irish Catholic, are you going to be able to handle my divorce? I said, it's not my divorce, I really don't care. But she had concerns that she was, she asked about, and it really never bothered, that issue part of it never bothered me. I had other cases where I don't know whether they're your religious or moral views where you start to, that line is blurred a little more, I think. Sometimes just your own personal feelings about how things should proceed after you're out of the picture that sometimes left me with pauses for people. But go ahead, John.
Yeah, I thought it was a good dissent that this case had a dissent. But it's interesting when you look at the argument. The only real argument they talk about like this unseemly spectacle of parents asking for damages. But the only argument is the child is going to feel bad that his parents asked for damages. And I think it is what it is for the child. It's not. That was the only really thing that they were arguing about. So I think in that sense, it was kind of a little bit out of touch and a little bit influenced by, their moral beliefs.
I thought so when I looked at it, and I know 2 of them reasonably well. They're very, very. You have no problem sitting down with them and talking. They're really, really nice people. But when you look at it, it does seem more influenced, at least in part, I would say, outside the law. There's not a law in this type of cutting-edge stuff a lot of times anyway. To what extent will your religious/moral views affect what you do with cases? I mean, is that you have given any thought to that? Because I had a client ask me the question, and I imagine that there may be some times you may be asked similar issues.
we've given a lot, it was one of the questions on the midterm.
Yep.
We've given a lot of thought to it.
Okay, good. Figure out where you go. I just want you to think about it because I do think this is a case where there's, I don't think that's, to me, I'm not surprised that those 3 would band together to form that dissent. And Nolan's a really, really nice guy too. He was a mediator for one of our cases one time. And he's just a really, really nice guy.
So I wrestled with it.
Yep.
And thought about it a great deal before I answered it. Because I think it is difficult to separate our own personal biases often, but I think that that's our obligation to do.
Yep. I think you got to figure it out. I think that the place where you got to figure it out is before you take the case,
Right.
obviously, because once you're in, and that's that you don't, your personal views aren't always, well, not really dispositive at all. Sometimes we need to be reminded of that. We need to be reminded of that, because sometimes you say, I'm not sure I've got the right side. Well, at some point, that's not your call to make. You have to argue the case. Go ahead, Bart.
I was just back on this issue of damages.
Yep.
I just can't wrap my head around the fact that they're probably causing damages to the child by even bringing this suit. I mean, it's going to be so much pain and suffering. The kid's going to have to go to therapy his whole life. I would think so.
That's your dissent, isn't it? I mean, this is some baggage. We can sort of laugh at it, but
I mean, can't you quantify those damages, like that the child would have?
well, but those damages aren't caused by the doctor. Those are caused by mom and dad. No. No, right? I mean, this is the problem with the case, is that it's an interesting case because I think there's a lot of different angles on it. And not that if I weren't in the position that I wouldn't want, and God knows, the kids are incredibly expensive. If someone else is willing to pay for college and all the summer camps and even $200 a pair of sneakers, you just write the check. But I do think, and I know that in my case certainly, I know I owe you credit, and I don't know how we value it either, but you get some credit for it, even on, and there are bad days, right? We all know that, but it's something you still get a credit. Hey, let me quickly do a couple of the others. Mark versus Khan. So my wife is named Congarelli, and I'm a coin, and our kid's a coin. So we get divorced, and she can change them to Congarellis? That's what it says? Huh? What do you mean that's okay? They're coins. Huh?
That's called mid-name.
No, she still uses Congarelli professionally.
She can give her kids that. That's okay.
She didn't give them that. They were coins. They're coins. No. Really, they're coins right now. But okay, so things don't work out, and we have, divorces are oftentimes not pretty. So she says, they're going to be Congarellis from here on out. And not only Congarellis, I'm going to change their religion too. Did she do that too? No? You sure?
Depends on your divorce agreement.
I'm sorry?
Their religions maybe, but not the name.
Well,
And when they say it's out of spite, like out of this.
she's smart enough not to say it's spite. It's to blend our new family, right? Go ahead.
I wouldn't even say blending a new family. She has a very good argument with medical things that to show that she's the parent if her name's Condarelli still. And she wants her children to go to school with the same name she has, so they call her for emergency situations.
So she has a very valid reason to change their names after 10, 12 years. It has nothing to do with spite, Jean.
I'm sure it does, but she has an argument, and you have to prove that it
And the religion too?
It's free to change.
Well, so the court, in these family law situations, at the end of the day, they can do whatever it is they choose, even if I'm paying support, I assume, right? As long as it somehow can fit into this best interest of the child standard. So as long as the party doesn't lie, as long as the party may prepare to lie, no rather, right? This has nothing to do with how much I hate him or what he's done. It's really...
You can't unilaterally change something after a divorce. It depends on your divorce agreement. But I think that he was still a participant in these kids' lives.
But even over his objection, the court could have authorized it?
Yeah, well, over his objection, the court could do anything if they want to.
If the court finds it's in the best interest of the child.
That's the overarching principle in all
Right.
in children cases, the best interest of the child, and I'm sure you've learned that in juvenile law class as well. But here, I think the trial court judge just basically based his decision on the hostility she had, and that's why it was reversed, because it wasn't based on the best interest of the child, just simply because she wanted to spite the husband, and that's why it was reversed. But also it says when a father supports the child and manifests a continuing interest in the children's welfare without reasonable delay, objects to an attempted change of name, the court still must decide the issue by determining what is the best interest of the child.
And as long as the court, out at the end of the day, feels it's in the best interest, they have the power to change almost the fundamentals of who we are. Our name, our religious upbringing.
If the court finds that the mother's doing that to promote
Oh, the
best
father,
interest,
right? It's not just to make it clear, it's not always one-sided. Melanie, you're sitting there, what, you look like you have something to say.
It's always the mother. It is always the mother.
That one wants to change their name.
Men are completely, family law is completely gender biased on behalf of women. Men are underrepresented, they are not treated fairly, and it's just the way that it is. And it sucks, but it is the way it is. I don't think it should be that way. I think that men should have a little more say in their children's lives, even after a divorce situation, if they continue to participate.
Remain active and support.
Yeah. Not even necessarily financial support,
I agree.
but
I don't understand what
you
you're
know, I mean, I see my kid like every weekend and one night during the week or whatever. I should be able to say, you know, no, like he's 12 or 13 or whatever. This has always been his name. This is always what he's done. And now because you're married to this person, you're gonna change that because you're a bitch? No.
No, I agree with what she's saying, because I do think there is a bias, that needs to be changed towards women, and that's another sword they can wield against the non-custodial parent by making these changes or petitioning the court to make these changes that further puts a wedge between the non-custodial parent and the children. So I don't think they should be able to change the status quo unless there's some real valid
compelling reason, but that's not what the language talks about, just if you look at it. And, you know, what I wanted you to see is that the fact is the court can, at least in the family law situation, has a great deal of latitude to do virtually whatever it wants. And some of these things may be done for spite, but could be in the best interest of the child. And I've seen more than a few attempted name changes and the like. And sometimes, and adoptions in the same vein. And sometimes you'd be surprised that I don't care. So does this mean I don't have to pay support anymore? Yeah, that's what it would mean if there's an adoption and a name change. Oh, okay, well that's what she wants. and at the same thing is, you know, that doesn't sit well either. But
that goes against the continuing participation.
Yes. Well, I wasn't much of a participant, frankly. And then lastly, I want you to look at this Knighton case, which is really, it's Knighton and then Edgar, but Knighton is the attempt to use an injunction to prevent someone from stealing her partner. And the court said it's a historical fact in equity is that equity will not enjoin a criminal act because there are other remedies at law. If someone's committing a criminal act, the remedy at law obviously would be attempt to pursue criminal charges. So this, the Knighton case is really a pretty historical case with respect to the adage that equity won't enjoin a criminal act, and the reason is because there's an adequate remedy at law. Lastly, I wanted you to look at this Edgar case to recognize that when someone doesn't comply with these family law orders, and it happens a lot, then there are either two alternatives for either civil or criminal contempt that flow from that, both of which at the end of the day, either civil, which uses the civil standard of proof and the civil protections which are non-existent, or criminal contempt, which will bring the criminal level of proof and the criminal protections. But the fact is that the contempt can carry with it the cost to the other side for having to bring the contempt action and cure that breach of the court's order. Contempt is brought in these situations to vindicate the court's authority, and it carries with it the ability to try and recover the costs from the disobeying party. So those cases are worth looking at because, again, and if you're going to do family law, you probably ought to take more of it than just this little segment of it, because there is a lot of work in that area, and there are an awful lot of issues that the probate and family court gets involved with. And so I thought that was an interesting selection of cases for you to at least think about as you think about this area. Questions? I'm gonna run to this other meeting. Thank you. 0 to through college?
There's also other factors that could play into. I mean, what if the mother wanted to be a stay-at-home mom? Then you could supplement her income from not working and staying.
So then I have to pay her too?
Possibly.
No, is that right?
No,
So
I think it's just for the cost of the child.
The cost of the child itself.
just the cost of raising the child. Well, does that? So what? Then let me ask that. What about daycare then?
Yeah, you have
Because
to.
daycare expenses
Yeah.
outrageous now. So wait a minute. So daycare's in? Because if daycare's in, then why couldn't the lawyer say, well, we're not going to pay for daycare, but my partner is losing income as a result of choosing to stay at home. Therefore, we would like an offset for that.
I think
You get both.
You get one or the other.
One or the other, but each are recoverable.
But
I think it
income is
should.
far.
How until what age?
18, that's it.
Well,
No, until the child's 18?
No,
Daycare?
not for you.
Until you can leave them home alone.
So what age can you leave them home alone?
What average is
Because I don't think
that?
we're going to have an agreement on that either.
Then how come you have to pay child support until you're 18 years old anyway?
I think
Because they still have expenses.
Area that there are families willing to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to have a child. Give them up. No. And if you're not giving them up, at least in part, we have to recognize that there's some benefit. So how do you determine what the benefit is? Because even if we give you all the costs of raising that child, on the other side of the ledger is you've been conferred, to some extent, some type of benefit that has a financial value to it. One has to be offset against the other. I mean, the decision says that, doesn't it? So tell me how you do that. And I want to put one other question out on the table, because the decision says, at least I think it says, and I'll ask you if you agree, the decision seems to make a distinction between those people who choose not to have more children because of the financial expense involved, and those people who choose not to have children because they're concerned about the child being unhealthy or carrying genetic problems and the like. And is there a difference there? Suppose someone decides we're not going to have any more children because our first child has some birth defects that we're worried about that the next child might have as well. But then the child's born and is completely healthy and free of those birth defects. So now you don't have any damage whatsoever, even under the same circumstances? So there's a bunch of different questions on the floor. You can take and run with whatever one you like.
I think if their only concern was that the child would have defects and that's why they didn't have the child, and if they had it and it was healthy, then I don't think that they should recover for anything. I mean, if that was their only issue.
There's no damage.
Correct. If, on the other hand, it was a financial difficulty, I could see how that could be an ongoing problem. And damages could be easily calculated for that. So.
Well, when you say easily calculated for that, what do you mean? Like
Well,
how much?
For example, you would take into account, like on average, how much it would take to raise a child, and then you have the college and the school.
So all of that though, clothing and food and sneakers and.
Well, to support a child.
But is that the damage when we're talking about it? Is the complete cost to raise that child from zero? What are you saying? Well, you should, because actually I've got to cut this class a little short because I have a meeting about accreditation visit at 5 o'clock, so we got to get cooking here. I'm sorry?
Oh, I thought you said we're getting ABA accredited.
No, it's New England Association of Schools and Colleges visit.
That's the one that we're already accredited.
That's correct. That's next week. So let me just say that I'm going to have to cut this a little short because I've got a meeting with faculty and the like. No, at 5. Next Tuesday at this time, or at 4 o'clock actually, the New England Association of Schools and Colleges will be here, and they have scheduled at 4 o'clock next Tuesday a meeting with the students. Any interested students who would like to come share their thoughts about how great your experience is here. Anything else you'd like to share? So we're not going to be able to start till 5 o'clock next Tuesday. And you all should feel free to go. There'll be food and drinks and stuff. But you should, if you would, go and talk to them. That would be great as well, because they really do want to hear from students, faculty, staff. They want to hear from everyone. That will be next Tuesday, and that'll be in the room right across the hall here, 208. But we've got to finish section 10, these family law cases, and they're unusual family law cases. So when I left you last time, I asked you to think about how we're going to value the cost of that child, but how we also value the benefit, because you are being conferred a benefit if you have this child. So how do you do that? And by the way, how do you really get the cost of the child to raise them to God knows when you could also give them up for adoption? Again, with the notion of mitigation of damages. Tell me that we can't force anyone to abort a child. We can't force you not to give birth to the child. But if you give birth to the child, if it's such a burden, we've seen from our earlier cases in this area,